Hey everyone, and welcome to the Deep Dive. You know, we've had so many requests lately for a deep dive into improving English reading skills. So we're doing exactly that.
Yeah, it's something everyone seems to want to get better at.
But you know, we're not just talking about skimming through words.
Oh, definitely not.
We're talking about truly understanding and engaging with what we read.
Yeah, and about building a better vocabulary.
Oh, for sure, a richer vocabulary.
Yeah,
And even sharpening our critical thinking skills.
that's right, like a full brain upgrade.
It really is. And we've got this awesome source all about boosting those English reading skills.
15 strategies packed in there.
15. We're going to pull out the best ones.
Absolutely, the most effective and maybe even some surprising ones.
So get ready to level up your reading game because we're diving right in.
All right, let's do it.
So this source really emphasizes that daily reading is key. They actually compare it to exercising a muscle.
Oh, interesting analogy.
Like the more you use it, the stronger it gets. But I think a lot of people hear daily reading and they think, another thing to add to my to-do list.
Yeah, it can sound daunting, but it doesn't have to be like that at all.
Right. So what's the secret?
Well, it's not really about adding another chore to your day. It's more about finding those little pockets of time we all have and using them for reading.
Okay, so like what? What are some examples?
Well, think about it. You know, waiting for your coffee to brew, instead of scrolling through social media, read a news article.
Okay, yeah.
Or on your commute, maybe listen to an audiobook, or even just read a page or two of a novel before bed.
Oh, I like that. Those little reading micro moments.
Exactly. It all adds up.
And speaking of finding the right fit, our source also talks about how important it is to choose books that are actually at your level.
Oh, that's so important. Have you ever struggled through a book that was just way too difficult?
Oh, absolutely. And it's just so frustrating, and you end up feeling defeated.
Right. It's like trying to run a marathon when you've just started jogging.
Perfect analogy.
But you know, when you choose a book that's a little challenging but still within your grasp, that's where the magic happens.
Totally. You stay engaged, you learn new things, and you feel good about yourself.
It's like leveling up in a video game.
Ooh, I love that.
Yeah.
So where's level 1 for English readers? Where should people start if they're feeling a little lost?
Well, the source mentions graded readers.
Graded readers.
They're books specially designed for English language learners.
Oh, okay.
They use simplified language and vocabulary, making it easier to understand and build your confidence.
So they're like training wheels for your reading journey.
Exactly. You start with the easier levels and then gradually work your way up.
Love it. Okay, next up we've got a strategy that I think is a total game changer, using audiobooks while you read.
Oh, that's a good one. I've heard people call it a cheat code for learning.
Right. It's amazing.
You're seeing the words on the page and hearing them spoken aloud at the same time.
Exactly. And the source really emphasizes how much this can help with pronunciation and comprehension.
It really does. It's like having a personal tutor whispering the words in your ear.
I'm a big fan of audiobooks,
Mhm.
especially since I've always struggled with silent reading.
Oh, interesting. I can see how that would be helpful.
Yeah, and I think for anyone who learns better by listening, audiobooks are an amazing tool.
They really are. You know, if you're new to audiobooks, I always suggest starting with a book you've already read and enjoyed.
Okay, so like a familiar story.
Exactly. That way you can really focus on the language without getting lost in the plot.
That's a great tip. Now, since we're talking about using our voices, the source also recommends reading aloud.
Oh yeah, that's a classic.
It's such a simple thing, but it can really make a difference.
It really can. You're engaging your vocal muscles, refining your pronunciation, and you know what?
What?
It really helps you internalize the rhythm and flow of the language.
It's like a workout for your tongue.
Exactly.
And while it might feel a little silly at first, especially if you're alone, I actually think it can boost your confidence too.
I agree. It definitely can.
You know, I've even tried recording myself reading aloud and then comparing it to a native speaker. It's amazing what you can pick up that way.
That's a great idea. You know, it helps you notice those subtle things like intonation and emphasis that you might miss when you're just reading silently.
Totally.
Yeah.
So let's talk about vocabulary. What do we do when we encounter a word we don't know?
Okay, so have you ever just skipped over it and hoped for the best?
Ooh, all the time. I used to think that was normal.
I think we've all done that. But our source really emphasizes the importance of learning new words in context.
Okay, in context.
Yeah, instead of just memorizing lists of words, which can be, you know,
Super boring.
and not very effective.
Right. So what's the alternative?
Well, think about it this way. Imagine trying to learn how to bake a cake by just reading a list of ingredients. You might know the individual parts, but you wouldn't understand how they work together, right?
Right.
Language is similar. When you encounter a new word within a sentence, you get clues about its meaning from the surrounding words.
Oh, the context.
Exactly. You see how it's used, you get a feel for its nuances.
It's like those aha moments when a word suddenly clicks because you see it being used in a real situation.
Exactly. Those are the best. And to help remember those new words, the source recommends keeping a vocabulary journal.
Oh, that's a good idea.
So you jot down the word, the sentence it was in, and maybe even a little drawing or diagram to help visualize the meaning.
I like that. It's like turning passive reading into active learning.
Exactly. You're building your own personal dictionary of understanding.
Love that. Okay, now let's talk about real dictionaries. Are they friend or foe in this quest to boost our vocabulary?
Well, that's a good question.
What does the source say?
The source has a really interesting take on it. Dictionaries are, of course, valuable tools, right?
Oh, for sure.
But they can also become crutches if we rely on them too much.
So it's about finding that balance.
Exactly. Balance between using context clues and looking up words when you really need to.
So what are some tips for using dictionaries effectively?
Well, the source recommends trying to use English dictionaries as much as possible.
So not translating.
Right. It really forces you to think in English, which can be a big help.
Yeah, I can see that. And you know what else? There are so many amazing online dictionaries available now.
Oh, I know.
They go way beyond just definitions and pronunciations.
Yeah.
They give you example sentences, usage notes, even interactive quizzes.
So much more than just looking up a word.
Exactly. So much more engaging. Okay, let's talk about those times when we feel intimidated by massive amounts of text.
Oh yeah, those walls of words.
How do we tackle those without feeling overwhelmed?
Well, the source offers a really practical solution called chunking.
Chunking? What's that?
Basically, you break down those huge blocks of text into smaller, more manageable pieces.
Okay, like bite-sized pieces.
Exactly. Instead of trying to read an entire chapter at once, you focus on finishing a paragraph or a page at a time.
Oh, I see. So it's like setting mini goals for yourself.
Exactly. It helps you stay focused and prevents you from feeling overwhelmed.
I can see how that would be really helpful for anyone who gets intimidated by large amounts of text.
It really can. And you know what else? When you achieve those mini goals,
Yeah.
it creates a sense of accomplishment and keeps you motivated.
It's like, yes, I finished another chunk. Bring on the next one.
Exactly. And that brings us to another key strategy: setting clear reading goals.
Okay, goal setting. What kind of goals are we talking about here?
Well, it's not so much about specific numbers like reading a certain number of books a month.
Oh,
It's more about finding what works for you and your individual goals.
that's personal.
It is.
Yeah.
Maybe you set a goal to read for a certain amount of time each day.
Yeah.
Or maybe you focus on finishing a certain number of chapters each week.
Whatever works.
Exactly. The
Yeah.
key is to set goals that are challenging, but also realistic, something you can actually stick to.
Right. And I think tracking your progress is a great way to stay motivated.
Oh, absolutely. It's so satisfying to see how far you've come.
It is. You know, you can use a reading journal, an app, or even just a simple checklist to track your progress.
Whatever works best for you.
And even those small, consistent efforts, like reading just a few pages each day,
They really add up over time.
like they say, slow and steady wins the race.
Exactly. Consistency is key when it comes to building any new habit, especially reading.
So true. And now, let's talk about how to make sure we're not just reading words, but actually understanding and remembering what we read.
Okay, so one of the most powerful techniques for that is summarizing.
Summarizing.
Yeah. It forces you to think about what you've just read.
You have to put it into your own words.
Exactly. You're not just passively absorbing the information, you're actively processing it.
Okay, I can see how that would help with remembering.
It really does. It helps you solidify your understanding.
So, any tips for becoming better summarizers?
Well, one thing you can try is jotting down the key points of each chapter or section as you read.
Oh, like taking notes.
Exactly. And you know what else? You can even try explaining what you've read to a friend.
Like teaching it.
Exactly. It's a great way to test your comprehension and make sure you're really understanding the material.
I love that. Okay, let's move on to another fantastic strategy. Book discussions.
Book discussions, they're so much fun.
They are. And, I used to think book clubs were only for serious literary types.
Oh yeah, me too.
But I've come to realize that discussing books with others, even casually with friends, can be so enriching.
It really can. You get to hear different perspectives and interpretations.
Yeah, and it can help you see things you might have missed on your own.
Absolutely. And it just makes the whole reading experience more fun and engaging.
It's like having a reading buddy to share the journey with.
Exactly. And speaking of expanding your horizons, what about when you feel stuck in a reading rut?
Oh, you mean reading the same type of books over and over?
Exactly. The source encourages us to explore a variety of genres and formats.
Okay, so break out of that comfort zone.
Exactly. Don't be afraid to try something new.
So we're talking about branching out and reading newspapers, magazines, blogs, even graphic novels.
Exactly. And even things like scripts or song lyrics.
Oh, interesting. I hadn't thought about those.
It's all about exposing yourself to different styles of writing and different ways of using language.
And that can only make you a better reader, right?
Absolutely. It's like cross-training for your brain.
Love it. Now, here's a strategy that I was initially a bit skeptical about. Revisiting old favorites.
Oh, rereading. I love rereading books.
Me too. But I kind of thought it was just for, comfort and nostalgia.
Oh, I think it's much more than that.
What do you mean?
Well, think about it. When you revisit a book you love, you're not just reading it again, you're experiencing it on a deeper level. You notice things you might have missed before. You appreciate the author's craft more fully.
And the source actually suggests reading a book once for pleasure and then revisiting it with a more focused eye for learning.
That's a great approach. You get to enjoy the story twice and learn something new each time.
I like that. Okay, last but not least, let's talk about speed reading.
Oh, yeah, the holy grail of writing skills.
Is it really possible to read faster without sacrificing comprehension?
It definitely is. But it's important to remember that speed reading isn't about just racing through a text to say you've finished it.
Right, it's not a competition.
It's about learning how to read more efficiently.
So what are some of the techniques involved?
Well, one technique is called skimming.
Skimming.
Yeah, you quickly glance over the text to get the main idea without reading every single word.
Oh, like reading the headings and subheadings.
Exactly. And another technique is called scanning, where you look for specific information.
So if you're looking for a particular date or fact, you scan the text until you find it.
Exactly. These techniques can be really helpful for navigating long articles, research papers, or even just quickly getting the gist of a news story.
It's like having superpowers for information processing.
Exactly. But even with all these fancy techniques, I think the most important thing is to make reading fun.
Oh, for sure. It shouldn't feel like a chore.
Exactly. If you're not enjoying it, you're not going to stick with it.
So choose books that you're genuinely interested in, create a cozy reading space, and give yourself permission to just get lost in the story.
It's all about making reading a pleasurable experience.
And the source leaves us with one final reminder: consistency and patience.
Oh, that's so important.
We can't expect to become amazing readers overnight. It takes time, dedication, and a whole lot of practice.
It's a journey.
It is. And like any journey, it's going to have its ups and downs, but the rewards are so worth it.
Absolutely. So just keep reading, keep exploring, and keep enjoying the process.
Great advice. So we've covered a lot of ground in this first part of our deep dive into English reading skills.
Welcome back to the deep dive. We're picking up where we left off, exploring even more ways to boost your English reading skills.
Yeah, in part one, we talked about finding those reading sweet spots, fitting reading into your day, even adding audiobooks to the mix.
But now I think it's time to get a little more hands-on. Okay, I'm ready to get practical. What's next?
Well, the source talks about this idea of active reading.
Active reading? That sounds a little, redundant. Isn't reading already like an active thing?
You'd think so, but a lot of people approach reading passively, almost like watching TV.
I can see that.
The words are going in, but they're not really engaging with the material.
Okay, so how do we switch from passive to active? What does that actually look like?
Imagine you're having a conversation with the author, right?
Okay.
You wouldn't just sit there silently.
No. You'd ask questions, you'd share your thoughts.
Exactly. You'd challenge their ideas. Active reading is about bringing that same level of engagement to the written word.
So we're talking about highlighting, underlining, taking notes in the margins, maybe even arguing with the author in our heads.
All of that. You're creating a dialogue with the text.
Okay, that makes sense.
And by doing that, you're really forcing yourself to slow down, to pay attention, to truly grapple with the ideas.
It's like a workout for your brain.
Exactly. But I know what you're thinking. If I stop to analyze every sentence, won't I lose the flow of the story?
That's exactly what I was thinking.
And that's a valid concern. That's where balance comes in. Active reading isn't about dissecting every single word. It's about being strategic. You highlight the key phrases, jot down those questions, but you also let yourself get swept away by the narrative when the moment calls for it.
Okay, that makes sense. It's like finding that sweet spot between analysis and immersion.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's talk about book discussions again. We touched on them briefly in part 1, but I'd love to explore how they can actually help us become better readers.
You know, when you discuss a book with other people, it really forces you to think critically about what you've read.
You have to explain your thoughts and interpretations.
Exactly, and you hear other people's perspectives, which can be so eye-opening.
Absolutely. It's amazing how many different ways people can interpret the same text.
And it can really challenge your own assumptions and make you think about the book in new ways.
It's like taking your understanding for a test drive.
That's a great way to put it. And beyond that, being part of a book club or discussion group can just be so motivating and fun.
Oh, totally. It's like having a built-in support system for your reading journey.
Exactly. You can celebrate your successes together, commiserate over those challenging books.
Or even those books you just didn't like.
Exactly. And motivate each other to keep reading and exploring.
I love that. Now, let's revisit this idea of chunking. It sounds good in theory, but I'll admit I often find myself getting caught up in a paragraph and just wanting to keep going.
Oh, yeah, I know that feeling. It's like you're on a roll.
But is that a bad thing?
Well, not necessarily. But sometimes, we need to remind ourselves that reading comprehension isn't a race.
Okay.
It's not about speed, it's about quality.
Quality over quantity.
Exactly. And sometimes slowing down and really taking the time to digest a passage can make all the difference in our understanding.
I can see that. So how do we know when it's time to pause and chunk it down?
Well, if you find yourself rereading the same sentence over and over again, or if your mind starts to wander,
or if you just feel completely lost.
Exactly. Those are all signs that it's time to take a break down that text into smaller pieces, and come back to it with fresh eyes.
Makes sense. So instead of powering through, we need to listen to our brains.
Exactly. Give yourself permission to pause, reflect, and even reread when you need to.
I like that. Now, speaking of remembering what we read, I think a lot of people struggle with that. It's like the words just go in one ear and out the other.
I know, right? It's so frustrating. But luckily, there are some techniques we can use to improve our memory retention.
Okay, tell me everything.
Well, one of the most powerful techniques is summarization.
Summarizing, again.
Oh, it's that
important. Okay, so we talked about it in part 1, but remind me why it's so good for our memory.
Okay. So when you summarize a text, you're basically forcing your brain to process the information on a deeper level.
We're not just skimming the surface.
No, you're digging in. You're identifying the key points. You're putting them into your own words. You're making connections.
And that helps those ideas stick in our brains.
It really does. It's like taking a mental snapshot of the most important information.
I love that. Okay, so how can we become better summarizers?
Well, one tip is to focus on identifying the main idea or the thesis of the text.
So what's the big picture?
Exactly. What's the author's main point? Once you've got that, you can start breaking it down into smaller supporting points.
Okay, like creating an outline in our minds.
Exactly. And then try to condense those key points into a concise summary using your own language.
It's like creating a mini version of the text.
That captures the essence of the original.
I love that. Okay, let's talk about another technique that could be super helpful. Annotation.
Annotation, that sounds a little scary.
I know, right? Like we're defacing a sacred text or something.
Yeah.
But really, it's just about making notes and markings as we read.
And it can be incredibly helpful, especially for those longer, more challenging texts.
But I have a confession. I often end up highlighting practically every sentence, which kind of defeats the purpose.
I know, it's easy to go overboard. But the key is to be selective and strategic with your annotations.
So it's not about highlighting everything that seems important. It's about finding those golden nuggets of information.
Exactly. Think of your annotations as a roadmap, guiding you through the most important parts of the text.
Okay, I like that. A roadmap.
So how do we become better annotators? Well, one approach is to use different colors or symbols.
Oh, fun.
Yeah, to categorize your highlights and notes. Maybe use one color for key terms, another color for main ideas, another color for questions you have.
I like that. It's like creating a color-coded system.
And you know what? It also makes your notes much more visually appealing and engaging.
Yeah, and it helps you quickly find the information you're looking for later on.
Exactly. So let's talk about skimming. We mentioned it briefly in part 1.
Okay, skimming. It feels a little bit like cheating.
I know, right? But it's actually a valuable skill, especially when you need to process information quickly.
So like when you're browsing news headlines or trying to get the gist of a long article?
Exactly. And skimming effectively involves a combination of visual cues and keywords.
So we're looking for things like headings, subheadings, bullet points.
Exactly. They're like signposts guiding you to the most important information.
Okay.
And then you can scan those sections for keywords or phrases related to your specific purpose for reading.
So it's like having a mental search engine, sifting through the text for the specific information we need.
Precisely.
Okay, let's switch gears a bit and talk about vocabulary building. Again, it's something we touched on in part 1, but I'd love to explore some more specific techniques.
Okay, so one technique that I find incredibly helpful is spaced repetition.
Spaced repetition. That rings a bell, but I can't quite place it.
It's a learning technique that involves reviewing material at increasingly spaced intervals.
So instead of cramming a bunch of vocabulary words at once, we space out our review sessions.
Exactly. And the idea is that by doing that, we're forcing our brains to work harder to retrieve the information.
We're giving our brains a workout.
Exactly. And that strengthens our memory traces, making it more likely that we'll remember the information in the long term.
So it's about working smarter, not harder.
Exactly. And the great thing is that there are all sorts of spaced repetition systems and apps available now.
Oh, cool. So I could create flashcards with new vocabulary words and then use an app to schedule my review sessions.
Exactly. And the app will typically show you the flashcards at increasingly spaced intervals based on how well you remember them.
Oh, that's amazing. It's like having a personalized vocabulary trainer.
It really is. It takes all the guesswork out of it.
Okay, let's talk about audiobooks again. In part 1, we talked about how they can help with pronunciation and comprehension, but I'm curious to hear more about how to actually integrate them into our reading routines.
Well, one approach is to listen to the audiobook while you're simultaneously reading the text.
So it's like a synchronized reading experience.
Exactly. And this can be especially helpful for improving your pronunciation because you're hearing the correct intonation and rhythm while you're seeing the words on the page.
And I imagine it would be particularly helpful for people who struggle with decoding unfamiliar words or accents.
Absolutely. It's like having a pronunciation guide built right in.
I love that. Another approach is to listen to the audiobook first and then go back and read the text more closely.
Oh, that's a good one too. It's like getting a preview of the material.
It can make the reading experience less intimidating, especially if it's a challenging book.
Exactly. And for those who are short on time or just prefer auditory learning, audiobooks can be a great way to read more books.
It's like having a personal storyteller.
Exactly. Now, let's talk about a technique that can be incredibly helpful for exploring the nuances of language and culture. Parallel reading.
Parallel reading.
Have you ever come across a phrase in a book and thought, that just doesn't translate well into my native language?
Oh, all the time. Especially with idioms or slang. It's like, what does that even mean?
Well, parallel reading involves reading a text in your native language alongside a translation in your target language.
Oh, okay.
So you're basically reading the same text twice, once in each language.
I see. So it's like having a bilingual guide, helping us decipher those tricky phrases.
Exactly. And it can also be really helpful for expanding your vocabulary.
Because you're seeing how different words and phrases are translated.
Exactly. And you're getting a deeper understanding of the cultural context.
It's like having a language detective by your side, helping you unlock the secrets of the text.
Exactly. Now, let's talk about speed reading again. We touched on it in part 1, but I want to delve a little deeper into how it actually works.
Okay, I'm ready to unlock those speed reading superpowers.
Well, one of the key aspects of speed reading is minimizing subvocalization.
Subvocalization?
Yeah, it's that inner voice we often hear when we read.
Oh, you mean like when I'm reading silently, but I can still hear the words in my head?
Exactly, and that inner voice can actually slow down our reading speed. Yeah, because we're limited by how fast we can speak the words in our minds.
I never thought about it that way.
So the goal is to try to silence that inner voice and allow our eyes to take in the information more quickly.
So it's like reading with our eyes, not our inner voice.
Exactly. And there are techniques you can use to practice this, like using a visual pacer.
A visual pacer. What's that?
It's simply a tool that helps guide your eyes across the page.
Oh, okay.
It could be your finger, a pen, or even a specialized speed reading app.
I see. So it's like creating a smooth, rhythmic flow for your eyes to follow.
Exactly. Now, another key aspect of speed reading is expanding your visual span.
Visual span.
It's the number of words you can take in at a single glance.
Oh, okay.
If your visual span is small, you're only seeing a few words at a time, which means you have to make more eye movements to read a line of text.
And that slows us down.
Exactly. But if we can expand our visual span, we can take in more words with each glance.
And read faster. So how do we do that?
Well, it's a skill that can be developed with practice.
Okay, so give me some exercises.
One technique is called shuttering. You use a card or a piece of paper to cover up portions of a line of text, forcing your eyes to take in more words at once.
Oh, interesting. So you're basically training your eyes to see more at a glance.
Exactly. And there are also speed reading apps and software programs that can help you practice this.
I'll have to check those out. Okay, so we've talked a lot about speed and efficiency, but I think it's important to remember that reading isn't just about consuming information as quickly as possible.
You're absolutely right. It's also about engagement, understanding, and making connections.
So how do we make sure we're not just reading words, but actually absorbing and internalizing the information?
Well, one technique that can be really helpful for this is mind mapping.
Mind mapping.
It's a visual technique for organizing information and making connections.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
So instead of just taking linear notes, you create a more visual and interconnected representation of the material.
Oh, I like that. It's more engaging.
And it can really help you see the relationships between different ideas.
So how does it work?
Well, you typically start with a central concept or topic in the middle of the page.
Okay.
And then you draw branches outward, representing the main subtopics or categories.
And then from each subtopic, you can add more branches for supporting details, keywords, or even your own thoughts and reflections.
Exactly. It starts to look like a tree with branches and subbranches, each representing a different level of information.
I love that. It's like creating a visual map of the text.
Exactly. And you know what? You can use colors, images, and symbols to make your mind map more visually appealing and memorable.
It's like turning note-taking into an art form.
Exactly. Now, let's talk about a challenge that I think pretty much every reader faces. Staying focused, especially in today's world of constant distractions.
Oh yeah, tell me about it. It's like our attention spans are shrinking by the day.
It's true. And one of the biggest culprits is technology.
Oh, definitely. Those notifications are relentless.
They are. But you know, even beyond technology, there are just so many things vying for our attention these days.
It's like our brains are constantly in overdrive.
Exactly. So how do we combat this? How do we strengthen our focus and improve our concentration?
Give me the secrets.
Well, one simple but effective strategy is to create a dedicated reading space.
You mean like a special chair or a cozy nook where I only read?
Exactly. It could be a corner of your living room, a desk in your bedroom, a spot in a library or coffee shop.
Anywhere that feels calm and inviting.
Exactly. And it's important to make it a distraction-free zone.
So no phones, no TV, no social media.
Ideally, yes. The goal is to create a sanctuary for reading where your mind can relax and fully immerse itself in the world of the text.
It's like creating a mental vacation for your brain.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
even if you can't eliminate all distractions, you can at least minimize them.
Like putting your phone on silent or letting your family know that you're not to be disturbed.
Exactly. It's about setting boundaries and giving yourself permission to focus on reading.
I love that. Now let's talk about a technique that I've heard a lot about but haven't really tried myself. Mindfulness.
Mindfulness.
Yeah, mindfulness meditation, I've heard it can be really helpful for improving focus and concentration.
It absolutely can.
So what exactly is mindfulness?
It's a practice that involves paying attention to the present moment without judgment.
Okay, so like being aware of our thoughts and feelings without getting carried away by them.
Exactly. And you know what? It sounds simple, but it can be surprisingly challenging.
I bet. Our minds are always racing.
They are. But with practice, mindfulness can help us become more aware of those distractions and gently guide our attention back to the present moment.
Okay, so how do we incorporate mindfulness into our reading routines?
Well, one simple technique is to start each reading session with a few minutes of mindful breathing.
So just sitting quietly and focusing on our breath.
Exactly. It helps clear out the mental clutter and prepares your mind for focused reading.
I like that. It's like hitting the reset button on our brains.
Exactly. Now, speaking of staying focused, let's talk about motivation. It's easy to get excited about a new skill or habit, but then that initial enthusiasm fades, and we find ourselves slipping back into old patterns.
Oh, the dreaded shiny new object syndrome. How do we avoid that and stay motivated? Especially when it comes to something like reading, which can feel like a solitary and sometimes even daunting task.
Well, one strategy that I find really helpful is to set realistic goals.
We've talked about goal setting before, but how do we make sure our goals are actually motivating and achievable rather than setting ourselves up for failure?
That's a great question. I think the key is to start small and gradually build momentum.
So instead of aiming to read a certain number of books per month, maybe I start with a goal of reading just one chapter a day?
Exactly. It's about setting yourself up for success, experiencing those small wins that keep you motivated, and coming back for more.
Those small wins can really make a big difference.
They can. And I think it's also important to choose books that you're genuinely interested in. If you're not enjoying the book, it's going to be much harder to stay motivated.
That makes sense. I've definitely slogged through books out of obligation, and it's not a fun experience.
So choose books that speak to your interests, your passions, your curiosity.
And don't be afraid to abandon a book if it's not grabbing you.
Exactly. Life's too short to read books you don't enjoy.
Now, speaking of challenges, I think a lot of language learners, especially those who are learning English as a second or third language, struggle with self-doubt and fear of making mistakes.
I think that's so common. It's easy to get caught up in the idea that we need to be perfect, that we need to speak and write flawlessly.
And that can be paralyzing. It can prevent us from taking risks, from experimenting with the language, from truly immersing ourselves in the learning process.
Exactly. And it's so important to remember that mistakes are an essential part of learning.
They are. They're how we grow and improve.
Exactly. So if you find yourself feeling self-conscious or afraid to make mistakes, try to reframe your thinking.
How do we do that?
Well, instead of seeing mistakes as failures, see them as opportunities for learning and growth.
Easier said than done.
I know. It takes practice, but it's so worth it. And you know what else can help?
What?
Practicing with a language partner or tutor.
Oh yeah, someone who can provide feedback and encouragement in a safe and supportive environment.
Exactly. And even if you don't have access to a tutor or language partner, you can still create that safe space for yourself.
So be kind to ourselves, be patient with ourselves, and celebrate those small victories along the way.
Exactly. Now, speaking of celebrating victories, let's talk about journaling. We touched on it briefly in part 1, but I'd love to explore how journaling can be used specifically for language learning.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
Well, a language learning journal can be a great way to track your progress, reflect on your challenges, and celebrate your successes.
So I could use it to record new vocabulary words I've learned.
Absolutely. And you could also jot down interesting grammar structures you've encountered.
Or even just my overall impressions of a book I've read.
Exactly. And the great thing about a journal is that it's a completely personal space. You can use it however you like.
It's like a private conversation with ourselves about our language learning journey.
Exactly. Now, speaking of language learning resources, let's talk about online dictionaries and language learning websites.
The internet is such a treasure trove of resources for language learners.
It really is. But with so many options available, it can be a little overwhelming to know where to start.
I know, right? It's like information overload.
Yeah.
So, what are some of your favorite online dictionaries and websites?
Well, one dictionary I highly recommend is the Merriam-Webster Learner's Dictionary.
I've heard of that one.
It's specifically designed for English language learners, so the definitions are clear and concise, and there are lots of helpful example sentences.
And audio pronunciations.
Exactly. And it's available online for free, which is always a bonus.
Absolutely. Any other recommendations?
Well, for vocabulary building, I love vocabulary.com.
Vocabulary.com.
It's a really fun and interactive website with personalized quizzes, games, and even a vocabulary list builder.
That sounds great.
And for grammar explanations and exercises, I recommend Grammarly.
Grammarly. Isn't that a grammar checker?
It is, but it also has a really helpful website with detailed explanations of grammar rules.
Oh, cool. I have to check that out.
Now, speaking of practicing your English, have you ever tried Language Exchange?
Language exchange. I've heard of it, but I'm not really sure what it is.
It's basically a way to connect with native English speakers who are learning your native language.
Oh, so we can help each other out.
Exactly. You can practice speaking with each other, exchange feedback, and learn about each other's cultures.
It's like having a language buddy on the other side of the world.
Exactly. And there are all sorts of language exchange apps and websites available now, making it easier than ever to connect with people from around the globe.
I love that. Okay, let's talk about another fantastic resource for language learners.
Podcasts. Podcasts are amazing. I'm a huge podcast fan myself.
Me too. But with so many podcasts out there, it can be hard to know where to start, especially for English language learners.
That's true. But there are definitely some podcasts that are specifically designed for English learners.
Okay, so what should we look for?
Well, look for podcasts that offer clear explanations, slow and deliberate speech, and maybe even transcripts or subtitles.
So it's easier to follow along.
Exactly. Some podcasts I recommend include Voice of America, Learning English,
Okay,
6-Minute English from the BBC,
I've heard of that one.
and All Ears English.
Oh, cool. I'll have to check those out. And you know what else? Even listening to podcasts that are designed for native speakers can be helpful.
Absolutely. It exposes you to authentic language use, different accents, and a wider range of vocabulary.
It's like immersing yourself in the real world of English.
Exactly. Now, as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I just want to emphasize one more time the importance of simply reading more.
I know it sounds obvious, but it's really the best way to improve your reading skills.
It is, and the key is to make reading a regular habit.
Make it part of your daily routine.
Exactly. Find ways to make it enjoyable and rewarding. Choose books that you love, create a cozy reading space, and just get lost in the world of words.
I love that. Reading is truly a gift. It's a gift that opens up new worlds, expands our understanding, and enriches our lives in countless ways.
Absolutely.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We've explored so much already on this journey to becoming better English readers.
I know, right? From active reading and mind mapping to audiobooks and parallel reading, it's been quite a ride.
It really has. But in this final part, I want to talk about something that I think is at the heart of it all.
Oh, what's that?
Finding the right books.
Ah, yes. The books that speak to your soul.
Exactly. Because I think so many people get stuck feeling like they should be reading certain books.
Oh, yeah, the classics, the bestsellers, the books everyone's talking about.
Exactly. But they're not actually enjoying it.
Right. And if you're not enjoying it, what's the point?
Exactly. It becomes a chore, not a pleasure. And that can really kill your motivation.
Absolutely. So, forget about the shoulds and focus on the want tos.
Love that. So how do we find those books that we truly want to read?
Well, it starts with thinking about your interests, your passions, your hobbies.
Okay, so like, if I love cooking, I should be looking for cookbooks or food memoirs.
Exactly. Or if you're fascinated by history, maybe you explore historical fiction or biographies.
Or if you're into true crime, you could dive into the world of investigative journalism.
Exactly. It's all about finding those books that align with your passions and make you excited to learn more.
And don't limit yourself to just books.
Oh, absolutely not. Magazines, blogs, graphic novels, even poetry collections, they can all be valuable sources of reading material.
I love that, expanding our definition of what counts as reading.
Exactly. Now, speaking of finding the right fit, let's talk about setting reading goals.
Okay, goal setting. We touched on this in part 1, but I think it's worth revisiting.
Definitely. Because I think a lot of people fall into the trap of setting these really ambitious goals, like reading a certain number of books per month.
Oh yeah, I've been there.
Yeah.
And then life gets in the way, you fall behind, and you end up feeling discouraged.
Exactly. It's all about finding that balance between setting goals that are challenging but also realistic.
So how do we strike that balance?
Well, I think it's helpful to think about your lifestyle and your reading habits. Are you someone who enjoys a daily reading ritual?
Or are you more of a mood reader, picking up a book whenever the inspiration strikes?
Exactly. There's no right or wrong way to do it. It's all about finding what works best for you.
And I think it's also important to be flexible and adjust your goals as needed.
Oh, absolutely. If you're feeling overwhelmed, scale back. If you're finding it easy to meet your goals, challenge yourself a bit more.
It's all about finding that sweet spot where you're motivated but not stressed.
Exactly. Now, speaking of staying motivated, let's talk about reading logs or journals.
I love the idea of keeping a reading journal, but I'll admit I'm not always the best at keeping up with it.
Oh, I hear you. It's easy for it to become just another chore.
So how do we make it more enjoyable and effective?
Well, I think the key is to personalize it. Make it a reflection of your unique reading journey.
Okay, so not just a list of books I've read.
Exactly. It can be a space to capture your thoughts, feelings, reactions to what you're reading.
So if a quote really resonates with me, I could write it down.
Absolutely. Or if a passage makes you laugh or cry, jot that down.
Or if a book sparks a new idea, I could explore that in my journal.
Exactly. It's all about turning your reading journal into a creative outlet.
I love that. Okay, let's switch gears a bit and talk about a resource that can be really helpful for language learners. Etymology dictionaries.
Etymology dictionaries.
Yeah, those dictionaries that tell you the origin and history of words.
Yes. The word detectives.
Yeah, exactly. And I know it might sound a little intimidating,
I know, it can seem like a very academic pursuit.
but actually, etymology dictionaries can be incredibly fascinating and insightful.
They really can. You learn about the roots of words, their connections to other languages, and how their meanings have evolved over time.
It's like uncovering the hidden stories behind the words we use every day.
Exactly. Now, speaking of hidden stories, let's talk about poetry.
Poetry. I'll admit it's not something I read very often.
I know, poetry can sometimes feel a bit intimidating, like it's this very highbrow art form.
Yeah, and I haven't really read much poetry since high school English class.
But, poetry can be an incredibly rich source of language learning.
Really? How so?
Well, poets are masters of language. They play with words, sounds, and imagery in ways that can really expand our understanding of the possibilities of English.
So it's not just about understanding the literal meaning of the words, it's about appreciating the beauty of the language.
Exactly. And poetry can also be a great way to explore different accents and dialects.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, because poets often incorporate regional slang, idioms, and pronunciations into their work.
It's like taking a linguistic road trip, experiencing the diversity of the English language.
Exactly. Now, speaking of diversity, let's talk about the importance of reading books by authors from around the world.
Oh, yes. Extending our horizons beyond our own cultures.
Exactly. Reading books by authors from different backgrounds and cultures can challenge our assumptions, broaden our perspectives, and deepen our understanding of the world.
It's like traveling the world without leaving your armchair.
Exactly. And you know what else?
Len.
Audiobooks can be a fantastic way to experience these stories.
Oh, absolutely. I love audiobooks.
They can really bring the words to life and transport you to different worlds.
And there are so many audiobooks available these days covering every genre imaginable.
I know, it's incredible. You can find anything you're interested in, from classic literature to contemporary fiction to nonfiction, on every topic under the sun.
It's like having a personal library at your fingertips.
Exactly. So as we wrap up this deep dive into English reading skills, I want to leave you with one final thought. Reading is a gift.
I love that.
It's a gift we give ourselves, a gift that opens up new worlds, expands our understanding, challenges our assumptions, and enriches our lives in countless ways.
It's a gift that keeps on giving.
It really does. So keep reading, keep exploring, and keep enjoying the journey.
That's great advice. And that's a wrap on our deep dive into English reading skills. We hope you've enjoyed it and learned some valuable tips and strategies along the way.
Happy reading, everyone!